Welcome back to the Hype Mind. My name is Drew.
And I'm Danny.
And today we are super enthusiastic about hosting a very special guest, Dr. Harne. So we want to welcome you to the show, Dr. Harne, and start by asking you to tell us about yourself.
Sure. Well, thank you, Dan and Drew, for having me on here. It's good to meet you and have this conversation. I am currently the Dean of the School of Arts and Sciences at the University of St. Thomas in Houston. And I live here with my family, and we are members of the Our Lady Seat of Wisdom Parish here in Houston. And I have older children and I have younger children. And I grew up in various forms of Christianity, but we are Catholic now, and that's where we've been for the last since about 2005, and it's the end of a long journey, and I think we'll talk more about that. So it's been a good journey and a good path here. By background professionally, I studied music in the university. And also music history. So by training, I'm what you call a musicologist or a music historian. There aren't a lot of those you run into every day, and I work on medieval music. So I'm kind of a medievalist and a musician, and I do research on those things and teach in those areas too. So I've been very blessed to have a good life of education. I've had a lot of opportunities to study a lot of really great things and have a lot of great teachers. So. And
how did you get into the music history? What brought you down that path?
Yeah, so I love music. I love classical music, and I also like some other kinds, like bebop. I like Bud Powell and Thelonious Monk and Miles Davis and those guys. But I had an experience when I was in 5th grade. I'm a product of public education, and in 5th grade they put all of us on the bus and they took us to the local symphony. And they piled us in, and we sat down in the local symphony. The Pensacola Symphony played the first movement of Beethoven's 5th Symphony. And wow. I don't know what it was, but when it was over, all of my peers jumped up and ran down the aisle to get back on the bus. And I sat there as though someone had pinned me to the chair. It was unlike anything I had ever experienced in my life. It was a kind of almost supernatural experience hearing that music. And I went home that day and tried to find a classical station on the radio. Back in those days, they didn't have all talk all day on the public radio stations. They played a lot of classical music, but all they tended to play was really boring, slow stuff. And so I lost interest after that. But I still remembered that experience, and that led me to a few years later being able to start studying the clarinet because I was in public school. And then I studied music all the way through university, though I had a stint of about 3 years where I did construction work and worked in a hospital in between high school and university. But the music always stuck with me. And all I can say is it's just, I loved it. And this was a way of, I guess, doing music history was a way of being in it and around it and close to it and having an excuse to listen to it. And so I've been very blessed to be able to have been in that part of that world. It's a crazy world, but I've been blessed. So
that's true. Yeah. So you're originally from Florida then?
Yeah, the Panhandle. So it's more like Alabama.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. So that's where I grew up. And my father was in the Navy, and he was an Air Force airplane mechanic. And so I'm first generation to go to university. And but yeah, I grew up in the.
Oh wow! Nice.
Yeah.
That's terrific. And you mentioned that you've always had a background with Christianity.
Yeah, my grandfather was a Pentecostal preacher. He grew up on a mountain in Maryland. He and my grandmother. There were 10 boys in one family, and I think 10 girls in the other. And I think there were 3 marriages between the 2 families. It was a small town. I think it was Hagerstown, Maryland specifically. But at some point during, I think in and around the Depression, a kind of revival came to the mountain, and my grandfather felt called to become a preacher and start a church. And so they put everything they had in the car and they went to Pensacola and started the T Street Church of God. And my grandfather played guitar at church, and he sang, and they had a radio show he did. And so that was my father's father. And so I lived with him for a little bit while I was younger. And so I grew up in Flannery O'Connor calls it the Christ haunted South. And that's kind of what it was. I mean, it was, you can't escape it. Religion is everywhere, Christianity is everywhere. So I grew up in that, and then went to one form of church or another most of my life. At a certain point, your childhood faith, if it's going to last, has to mature into something adult. And so that there's always that process that has to happen too. So.
Yeah. Right. What do you mean mature into? I mean, I kind of get what you mean by mature into something adult, but when did that happen for you?
Yeah. So it happens in stages, I think. I think if you had asked me when I was, 17, I would have told you it had already happened. And if you'd asked me when I was 24, I would have told you it had already happened. And I think I'm here to tell you it's still happening. So, no, but I do think I think by the time I hit 30, the process. It's kind of slow, right? Because you get hit with things in your life, and you think, oh, well, that was really tough. That was a challenge, and you think that's the last thing, and it's not, right?
Right.
But
ongoing.
Yeah, but I think one of the big things that happens is when there's no one around you to enforce the practice of your faith, and you have to make decisions about, am I going to do this or am I not going to do this?
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
And that's like one of the first tests.
Right.
Am I going to get up? It's Sunday morning. What am I going to do?
Right.
Yeah.
I feel like that's when you make it your own and not just something your family does.
Yeah. Am I going to pray? Am I going to, what am I going to do? Are those reflexes going to stick and be developed, or am I going to let them go? So.
Right.
Yeah.
Can you take us through some of those stages you have or you went through?
Yeah, I'd be specifically curious to know what it was like. I mean, every area is different, but what it was like for you, because you went to public school.
Sure.
So did Daniel and I for high school, but we were homeschooled prior to that. And then even into college, what that was like, because I think a lot of people experience a lot of people, I think, lose whatever religious beliefs they had once they hit universities.
Sure. Like I said, I think, if you would ask me right after I graduated from high school, I would have said, oh yeah, solid. Everything's solid. It's mine. I'm a little embarrassed now when I think about some of the thoughts that I had about how mature I was. It was funny.
Probably all should be.
It was pretty pathetic. Yeah, I mean, I think God allowed some things to happen that really were they were a bit testing, a bit challenging. I would say for me that the hardest test has always been, am I going to trust him? Mm-hmm. I think some people, I think we all have our different tests, but for me, it's always been, can I really trust him? When you've got things in your life that are really important to you, that's when you don't have a lot of stuff that's important. If it's just you, and you're like, okay, I live, I die, I think everything's okay. That's it. But when you've got, like, when you're holding your first child, right, and you realize that how contingent it is that child is and that child's life, and that you can't be there every moment or every day, and this person that you love more than anything else in the whole world is at complete risk, and you realize, can I trust God with this child, right? Or your spouse, or then you have more kids, right? Can I trust God? Let's say you're involved in an apostolate or some sort of work that you care a great deal about. Can you trust that God is going to take care of that work, right? And if that work doesn't work out, can you trust that God was doing his good and perfect will through all of that? That's really hard for me, at least. So I think that's kind of the thread that runs through all of these. But I think I grew up in a very emotional form of Christianity, so it was highly subjective. I studied Latin, so I almost said subjunctive. I guess it was subjunctive too in many ways, but it was subjective, right? So and so you it depends on your feelings a great deal. And if you don't necessarily have the feelings, then you start thinking, well, is this real? Is this spiritually real? And even among and that can be true in different kinds of religious traditions as well. So I'd say part of the process was getting weaned off that, recognizing there's an emotional dimension to Christianity, but that waxes and wanes.
Mhm.
And so that was a real challenge. And that's where I found my way into a more liturgical form of Christianity. So I became interested in Anglicanism, in the Book of Common Prayer, and the rich tradition that was there liturgically and spiritually. But what I didn't realize was that if you're not careful, if you become Anglican, you might be very close to becoming Catholic. And so that's kind of what happened. The Catholic Church kind of snuck up on me when I wasn't looking. And so part of that process, the two phases, I guess. One was when no one was around, when I was at university and it was Sunday morning, was I going to go to church or not? And again, I wasn't Catholic at the time. And so going to church isn't something you really have to do every Sunday. But I remember after about the third Sunday, I woke up and I realized I haven't been to church the last 2 Sundays. What am I going to do? I need to get to church. And I was a bit embarrassed because I'd always said, oh yeah, I'll go to church when I go to university, but I had let it slip. And so I began to practice my faith. And there was no one there to say yes or no or remind me or anything like that. And this was a secular university. And so that was really important and really, really good.
So would you say,
yeah,
sorry to interrupt, would you say that was kind of a move on like the area of your integrity where you were like, hey, this is what I said I would do, I need to do it, or more of like a shame-based motivation? Or
yeah, there was, I wouldn't say it's shame. I mean, maybe if there was any shame, that was myself, right? It was disappointment, right? So
yeah.
It was an area of integrity, but it was also yeah, I mean, it was definitely integrity. I mean, there was really no question, do I really believe this? But we all believe things that we don't follow through on. At least
right.
I did. And so that was a big part of it. And then also the question of who am I gonna associate with, right? Who am I gonna spend time with? Am I gonna hang out with folks who are gonna help me do that, or am I not? And so that was pretty important as well.
Right.
And then I would say part of the maturing was also this was and it wasn't easy. I would say I'm skipping over a lot of parts, but I think there was a process of being weaned off that emotional form of Christianity, and because there was really no intellectual content. I didn't realize, as a Protestant, that there was this rich Catholic intellectual tradition that went all the way back to the church, the Bible and the Church Fathers, and didn't know anything about that. And so I had a lot to learn. So.
Yeah.
I got a question too. Did your when you were on your own and you had to make your own decision on going to church or not, did your family have expectations for you to keep up your own faith?
I think they did. I had been on my own as a young adult for about maybe 3 years before I went off to university. And so when I'm thinking about it right now, it had been a while. So it wasn't as though my parents were very present. I mean, we talked, but remember, these were the days before cell phones, like dinosaurs were roaming the earth, back, it was a long time ago. So I had to stand in line at the end of the hallway to use the payphone. Right. So it wasn't like someone could call me and say, hey, did you go to church today? No one did that. So, so there was, but I did have some friends. Those 3 years, I had a good friend that I had roomed with, and he had helped me grow in my faith a lot. And I would check in with him from time to time too. And I mean, when the drill about the iron sharpening the iron, right? And he was really the iron. Yeah. He was the guy keeping me on the path.
Well, I like your question there, where you were like, who am I hanging out with? Who do I want to associate with? Daniel and I talked about that in a previous episode. Mm-hmm. But it's been said time and time again, you're the average of the 5 people you hang out with the most. And so you got to watch who you're hanging out with, because they impact you. And a lot of people, I think and myself included, a lot of times you forget that,
Yeah. Yeah, I was talking to someone who works out, and it's also true that the kind of work you do also shapes you. Like
Yeah.
you shape the role, but the role also shapes you. And
Yeah.
Right.
so we're constantly being influenced and shaped.
Oh, for sure.
True.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh,
What do you think
Yeah, go
else
ahead, Dan.
shaped you in your life? Role models, someone
Yeah.
you read about.
Yeah, I think yeah, that's an interesting question. Yeah, it's interesting. I think that, when I was quite young, I think the distinctive Southern religious culture that I grew up in just had an enormous impact. So growing up, going to church 4 or 5 times a week, a very, very emotionally intense upbringing. If you ever seen a film, it's not a well-known film, but Robert Duvall did a film called The Apostle, and not a lot of people have seen it. And he made it with his own money, but that film in some ways captures my upbringing, that kind of intensity, that Christ haunted South. If you ever talk to Robert Duvall, you can say, "I saw The Apostle." He'll say, "Really, you and 10 other people, right?" Because no one's actually seen the movie. But I think that context. I mean, I was raised to read the Bible every day, and you just I mean, it was my mind and my heart was just in that all day every day. So, but then as an adult, a lot of people who grew up like I did, they're sick of it by the time they become adults. They're done. They're done. It's been so intense, all pervasive. They walk away and they embrace the completely secularized life, and they walk away and they give up on it, and especially if it's confining or constricting in any way. And a lot of my friends, I think that's what they did, and it was suffocating for them. And all I can say is that God's grace somehow took what was there that was good and moved it forward and allowed me to leave what was bad behind.
Yeah.
And so, yeah. So I think, and then I think as a kid, I mean, you're kind of, it's kind of like coming up from underground and you're looking around, and then God sent along people and he sent along books. So he sent along a good friend I mentioned earlier that kind of was a mentor for about 3 years in between high school and university. He helped me really grow in my faith. It was a great role model. And then, I mean, in fact, he's my son's godfather. I've known him longer than I've known my wife. And that friendship has really sustained us, and sustained me. And
That's terrific.
yeah. And then I would say books. I think reading, reading certain books. I think of Augustine's Confessions. I think of like reading War and Peace is what led me to get married. I wasn't sure I was ever going to get married. I wasn't, what am I going to do? My parents got divorced, and I thought, I don't really want that to happen. So by reading War and Peace, Tolstoy draws these amazing, amazing pictures of what marriage can look like.
War and Peace.
Yeah.
Oh, War and Peace.
War and Peace. Yeah.
The book.
Not War and Peace. War and Peace. Yeah. War and Peace. And so books like that, God would drop books along my path, but then also just good friends. I think, Aristotle talks about about how important friendship is. And even if you only have 3 or 4 real friends in your life, they can be extraordinarily influential. And I think I do. I have those. I have 3 or 4, 5 very close friends.
Yeah, I think they could be influential in a positive way and even a negative way too. So
yeah.
I gotta ask you though. You mentioned how you grew up, and your faith was very. You said you grew up it was emotional.
Right.
And what was the effect that had on you? Did it have a more positive effect because it was more emotional, or did it have did it not have an effect on you, or did it have a negative effect on your faith?
And when you say emotional, what comes to mind is like the Southern church singing kind of emotion.
Yep. That's it.
What
comes to mind for me is the feelings. It's very feeling based, and so
yeah. Yeah, well, I mean, I don't, and I want to be careful because I don't want to be disrespectful to my elders. I would say that um, the the way it worked in practice was there was a very these kinds of churches tend to have very charismatic leaders. So they're very effective speakers. They're very engaging and compelling. They may not realize it, but they're very good with the art of rhetoric. And there's a formula often underneath it all. But when you're in it, you don't really realize that there's a formula. You get the music just right. You use certain phrases, tones of voice, and it can, in the wrong hands, become very manipulative. And I think what can happen is you go to church for a kind of emotional high that is induced by the music and the lights and and you kind of become habituated to that. And there's a spiritual dimension. I think God can work through anything, and I think He can work through that in people's lives. But I have a close family member who his experience was he became very cynical and rejected it, and he saw it as just being completely manipulative. But I remember some very holy people from my upbringing who were there. They weren't participating in the more circus-like aspects of it, and they just went there because they loved God, and that was the place they felt closest to Him. And so very, very emotional. And I think it was very negative. What happened to most of my friends is so if you watch that film, the Apostle, or you have some familiarity with this tradition, what ends up happening is each church service becomes a call to repentance and kind of renew, basically almost get saved again, is to use their language, be born again. And so you're expected to go through this cycle of kind of hardened sinner at the beginning of the service to repentant, open-hearted person at the end. Or if you don't have a hardened sinner at the beginning, you come in kind of in an emotional state of equilibrium, and then you move to a higher emotional state at the end. And if you do that 2 or 3 times a week over the course of 10 or 20 years, you become completely worn out emotionally, and you can become very cynical, and that's what happened to a lot of my friends. So in a way, I was then attracted to a much more rational form of Christianity, and kind of went to the other extreme. And then I think as where I am now as a Catholic, I think it's you've got I think the full integrated Christian experience. So there are emotional or affective dimensions to it, but it's deeply, deeply rational as well.
Yeah.
And so I had to kind of go.
Not always only one.
No.
Yeah.
I mean, you got the great mystics, right? You've got
right.
But then you've got a lot of very strong, deep foundations.
So. That helps for sure to paint a much better picture in my mind, because now I see where you're coming from. I would be curious. You mentioned how you consistently, read the Bible and that was a big part of your life growing up, and how a lot of people tended to reject that as they grew older. And I know from a lot of people I've met, a lot of stories I've heard, that is very common for people to reject that. Looking back, do you think there's anything that you didn't necessarily like about that, or that you wanted to reject? Does that make sense? Do you see where I'm coming at with that question?
Maybe you can correct me or redirect me. I will say this. At one point, I had to speak to a youth group right after I became Catholic. And so the way I did it was I brought in my top 10 favorite things about being Catholic. And
awesome.
and I don't remember exactly what was on the list, but one of them was there were 2 that I remember immediately. One was that I don't have to be afraid of science anymore. So a lot of people who grew up like I did, where it's kind of a Bible only faith and it's very emotional, you never really engage your mind. And you really do think it's either this emotional faith or it's science and the intellect. And so there was always this fear that somehow science was going to make a discovery that was going to prove something false that was going to destroy Christianity, which is just ludicrous, because God made the world. He made the cosmos, and science studies that cosmos. And then on that same reality is the light of revelation that we get through scripture. And if there is an apparent conflict, it's just apparent. And we just have to kind of work it out, because it means that we're misunderstanding either the science piece or the faith piece. And I mean, it's an apparent conflict, because there can't be a real conflict, because they're both talking about the same reality. But
Yeah.
some parts of that reality are apparent through science only, or mainly, and then some parts of that reality are only apparent through faith. And there's some overlap. But you don't have to be afraid of science anymore, because the Catholic Church isn't afraid of science. And in fact, most of the great scientists through history were Christians or religious of some kind. So you don't have to be afraid of it. The other piece that I think, growing up as a kind of Bible Christian, you're always afraid they're going to make some discovery about the Bible, right? Or some history or scriptural thing that you're going to, is going to throw everything over. And but the Catholic Church isn't afraid of learning about the history of the Bible either, because the faith isn't built only on scripture.
Right.
The faith is built on this revelation. And who gave us scripture? The church gave us scripture, right? That's the Catholic view. The Bible is super important, but it's something the church gives us, and it helps us understand it and interpret it, right? So of those two things, I as a growing up as I did, I think I was always secretly worried, because you'd hear these stories of people going off to seminary, right? And they lose their faith, right? Because somebody got up and said, well, this about the Bible, not about the Bible. And, and then their faith would be destroyed, and they would leave seminary. Or some kind of science, they would discover, I don't know, some pig bone somewhere, and then everything would come, science would destroy. And that's just ludicrous, right? It's just not, that's not at all part of the Catholic vision of reality, or what it means to be a Catholic Christian. So yeah, so I think, to be honest with you, I think if all I had was what I grew up with, I would not be a Christian right now.
Mm-hmm.
I think it took becoming Catholic and entering into that larger intellectual and spiritual tradition for me to continue to be a Christian. I needed all that. I needed all that intellectually. I needed all that spiritually. I love what I had growing up. I'm very grateful for it, but it was too, I think I would have died of starvation.
Yeah.
Spiritually.
Honestly, that might be, I think that's a very relatable problem for many people, is they're starving. But we're running on a clock here. So let me ask you this, from your point of view and from where life has taken you.
Sure.
Why do you believe it's important to make religion a part of your life?
Sure.
And everybody's life.
Yeah. So I think I would invoke St. Augustine here. But I think anybody reflecting honestly on their own experience in a sustained and a deep way will come to this conclusion eventually, which is that we are made for some sort of encounter with the transcendent. We are wired for some sort of encounter with the divine. The purely material reality of life is insufficient. And even what we might call the most spiritual parts of human reality ultimately are going to be insufficient.
Right.
And I think it's like a human being that never has proper amount of vitamin C and is suffering from scurvy, right? And all of those, once you get them and they think their life is as good as it's going to get, and then you suddenly get them into a state of, they've got plenty of vitamin C and they're in good health, and they realize, wow, this is a human life. I'm not aching all over, I'm not sick. We're not fully human unless we're in communion with God. And I've tried it on both sides of the equation. And it's that communion with God, I think, whether it's through prayer and worship, it's not a confining or constricting experience. It's liberating. It's a bit like a child who might go to a piano and just bang on the piano with their hands. They think they're free, right? Banging on the piano with their hands. They can do whatever they want, right? You're free. You can take a piano, you can whack the piano. But the piano was made to be played in a certain way. But to do that, you have to be disciplined. You have to have the discipline to study piano and to learn your scales and to learn the piece and play. There's a way to do it, but doing it that way leads to the freedom of playing Bach or Beethoven or Mozart. But you have to be disciplined to get to the freedom. And so, yeah.
Yeah, and if I could add on to that, I think that's part of the reason people are intimidated, but it's not even that hard. Starting piano, you start simple, like everything.
Yeah. Yeah.
You only start learning where to place your fingers, and then how to play the same key 6,000 times. But it becomes muscle memory, and
Yeah.
next thing you know, you're playing Bach. But
You get a teacher and you actually do what the teacher tells you to do, and you're not too arrogant and stubborn. And and the same thing. I mean, same thing with, I think, the spiritual life. I mean, it's I mean, the most basic prayer, oh God, to which you can add, oh God, help me, or oh God, thank you, or oh God, this is a beautiful sky. And you stop talking about God in the third person, and you start talking to God. And then you go to mass, right? And you just and you enter in, you submit yourself to it. And what you do is you get yourself back, but you get more of yourself than you ever knew you had. And you become more fully human.
Yeah. I love that. That's such a great.
Yeah. So I do think these things are discoverable even if you're not Catholic or Christian. I think there are lots of examples of people who intuit this dimension of reality apart from any kind of explicit, being preached at. Maybe they come to these conclusions. So I do think it's a human universe.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like that's a part of the message behind religion and spirituality is God will reach you no matter where you are at. He comes to you and brings you to Him. With that being said, the goals of our channel are to help people answer questions and to find the help they need, and to promote consciousness of the just the depth of life and all that there is, that life offers, and what's beyond. That being known to you, what kind of advice would you have for people as a note to end on? Is there one big thing you'd want to share with people, if you could, from all the experience you've had?
I don't know that I have a lot. None of this is original. I think it's critical to never give up hope. And hope is not a human thing. The kind of hope I'm talking about is the hope that's rooted in the fact that God exists. We were created by God that loves us, and He wants to bring us to Himself, and never lose that. And then do whatever we can to cooperate with Him to get to know Him better through prayer and worship. Everything else, I mean, it's really pretty simple. We were made by God. We're going through this life, and we're called to return to God. And it's a big circle. And if we can move with that current, I think that's when we're going to flourish.
Yeah.
Great.
And read good books.
And never give up hope.
And read good books.
Read good books. Make good friends. Keep good friends. And listen to good music along the way, and pray and worship. Yeah.
Amazing.
Fabulous tips, Dr. Harne. Fabulous tips.
Yeah. Daniel, you have anything you want to add before we close out? We got less than a minute here. No?
Yeah.
Awesome. Read good books. Stay hopeful. Connect with the divine. Thank you, Dr. Harne. It was really a pleasure to have been able to host you and hear your story and your insight. And it
was my pleasure. It was great to meet you guys. Thanks for what you're doing. Keep up the good work.
All righty.
Okay.
Peace, everybody.
Peace.